Voice of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the statement in the 23rd Psalm, I shall not want, as the key to experiencing a spiritually successful life. Listen as we explain how and why I want obscures I am, because the Spirit is all in all. In this episode, we will discuss the operations of the divine principle along with the rule for its manifestation. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and want nothing. Swami, today's title of the show is Spiritual Riches of Real Existence. Sounds like there's a lot in that one phrase that we need to know about getting us started.
Yeah, I think it's very important to start to understand what we're calling life. This mental material world of energy isn't real existence. The only thing that is real is the divine creation, which, however, is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. I was inspired by an article in Christian Science Journal by Marion F. Beckler, and it was titled, I Shall Not Want. When I first opened the Kriya Yoga Ashram, I would say, there's nothing wrong with wanting. If you don't get what you want, you don't respond as if you're in danger. In the beginning, it was very important to know the distinction between needing and wanting. And what we learned, it was an excellent coping skill to make distinction that there is a big difference between if I don't get what I need because I am in a real life-threatening situation. The thing that we were trying to overcome was this idea of reacting to something that is not a life-threatening situation as if it was life-threatening. So in other words, you don't get a text and your heart is racing, your hands are sweating, you're responding as if a saber-toothed tiger is in the room and is going to devour you. Well, that's an overreaction. But as I progressed in spiritual science, this teaching helped me make a clear distinction between life and death reactions to being able to make more intelligent decisions. However, it is only a coping skill to being able to manage the testimony of the corporeal senses and make the human experience more enjoyable. Today we have a different goal, which is liberation from the belief in mortality and the idea of walking in the kingdom of heaven on earth.
We may have some listeners that might be introduced to this kind of thinking for the first time, Swami. So they might be thinking something like, well, I need to have a job because I need to put food on the table or I need to put gas in my car. So how would you advise them on the idea of needs and wants?
Well, again, you have to establish a value system that's going to be in accordance with universal order. The idea here is to build a mental landscape to support the divine principle. We start with the knowledge that divine creation is perfect. It's whole. It's everywhere always. And I am a reflection of this eternal life. The way that we do it without coming into contradictions is we tell the truth about the truth, and then we tell the truth about the lie. The mental material world of energy, this good and bad world, is not the divine creation. So we've separated the wheat from the tares at this point. And then you want to work with telling the truth about the lie, because even in the lie, there is a hierarchy of need. And the way that you determine the importance of your need is, how long can I seem to exist without it? Because we can live weeks without food, we can live days without water, we can live minutes without air, but we can't live a millisecond without the grace of God, without this connection to the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence. We expire. Then you start to work with your life-sustaining forces. Your number one life-sustaining force then becomes thought. Your number two life-sustaining force is breath. Number three is water. Number four is food. This gives you an intelligent diagram. You can start to establish your hierarchy of needs. Another thing that's very important in the Kriya Yoga we teach is understanding the relationship between life-sustaining force number one and life-sustaining force number two. Life-sustaining force number one is thought. Thinking right is paramount. This idea of putting God first, knowing the importance of your relationship with the divine principle is critical. And then understanding life-sustaining force number two, which is visible and tangible to corporeal sense, is now elevated to a position of importance that it warrants. And then when you understand that relationship between breath and thought, by controlling your rate of breathing, you can control your rate of thinking. This gives you a tool so that when you are reacting as if you are in danger, your heart's racing, your hands are sweating, and you're reacting as if you're in danger because of something like, I'm late for lunch, I'm going to miss the meeting. Well, they may be important to some extent, and with the relativity, you may eventually lose your job, but you're not going to die. You're not in an immediate life-threatening situation. This enables you to shut off the autonomic nervous system and now make an intelligent decision. And that's a great coping skill. But in this model here, we are seeking transcendence. We want liberation from the belief in mortality. That's a very different goal and objective. But if you're not able to manage the fear, then you're not even in the vestibule of spiritual science, because fear is the defense mechanism for the false sense of self. Before we can make ourselves receptive to divine revelation, we literally have to master the mind-body complex.
Swami, I have a question about liberating from the belief in mortality. So that would mean that we would have to have a belief or a knowing that we are immortal. Would that be correct?
Exactly. I mean, this is what we're talking about, stepping out of time into eternity in an attainable aspiration when we have developed the faculty which perceives the truth of being, the divine creation everywhere, always. And to help us understand this faculty we develop, we have a soundbite from Herb Fitch, Revelation of St. John, Class 3A. If anybody is interested in the full audio file or the complete program, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
When you read the Gospels, you find that there are many fragments missing, and oftentimes you're at the mercy of a translator, changes in language and in the meanings of language, so that finally we reach a point where certain things in the Gospels are open to different interpretations, and disputes can arise, and religions can be formed because we interpret it this way and he interprets it that way and someone else interprets it a third way. And throughout the centuries, whenever politics gets into religion and the state and religion become one and the same, you find a prevailing sense of rightness that wants to protect its own status. And if the Bible is in the way, it simply alters the Bible to suit itself, either the words out of the text or just changes the meanings of the words. So that you find for many centuries there was no such thing as reading a Bible. You went to whoever was the presiding clergyman and he told you what it meant. He didn't even bother to give you a Bible. He gave you his interpretation, and usually it meant that you lived in fear of God. A very strange thing happens with the revelation of St. John. It isn't in the usual language of the day. There's really no point in altering the words of the revelation of St. John because nobody understands it anyway. And so you'll find that of all of the New Testament, the one which you can depend on to have come down through the years unaltered, in its original form, as closely as is humanly possible, is the revelation. It was so far beyond the belief even of the clergy that they saw nothing in it that challenged them. And as a result, we fortunately have a document which brings us the pure truth of the Father, not subject to human will, to human discretion, to human politics, to human ignorance. It is as it was, and it reveals 7 steps that take us from man of earth to Son of God. But it does more than reveal the 7 steps that take us to Son of God. Those same 7 steps are 7 veils lifted up to reveal that the one who started out on the 7 steps was the Son of God at the beginning of the journey. Now you see, you can take the 4 Gospels and deny that Jesus was teaching the divinity of man. You can do as religion has done. You can teach that there is a mortal man out here and that he, through worshiping God on God's terms, will ultimately be received in a place called heaven, and there given his divinity as a reward for having lived a good, moral, human, mortal life. You can do that with the 4 Gospels and get away with it. It isn't true, but you can get away with it, and religion has. But when you come to the revelation of St. John, you discover that you no longer can get away with it. The revelation is that there is no mortal man. There never was. You can never be a mortal being. You can live under the belief that you are. Now, if we were discussing the 4 Gospels or the epistles, we might not seek to stand at the highest possible level of being at first. But now, you see, we're in the Supreme Court. And after the Supreme Court, there's no place else to go. So we must face the hard truth now. The truth is that Jesus discovered something that no religion in the world is willing to teach, let alone to believe. And that is that you are divine now. It shouldn't be difficult to accept, considering the fact that we are to call no man our Father except God. And so we proceed then with the understanding that divinity is your name. You can go deeper and say, therefore I am the Christ, but we let that go for a moment. Divinity is your name. And the 7 steps to illumination are the ways in which you reach the point where you can accept divinity as your name and demonstrate it.
Swami, I get a lot of that soundbite from Herb Fitch, but I do have a question for you. So when he says to accept our divinity, is that what is meant by walking in the kingdom of heaven on earth?
Yeah, I think what he's talking about here is what Mary Baker Eddy says, that we must live above corporeal sense and correct it. You don't just say, I am spiritual. We must understand ourselves to be perfect, know ourselves to be the expression of an indestructible principle. And the way we know we are conscious of this divine principle is the fact we are demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty. So you want to be using the testimony of your senses so that you're not just what we called senselessly optimistic. You're not saying God is all is good, and walking around defenseless against these non-existent powers that seem to do destruction and harm. It's like in the Bible where Jesus said, if somebody strikes you, turn the other cheek. He's not saying let them hit you again. This turning he's talking about is to know the truth and demonstrate the omnipresence of the divine principle, which then you have graduated from being under karmic law, this good and bad belief in two powers, and you are now under the law of the divine principle, which is absolute goodness, where no harm can ever take place.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, let's talk about some of the takeaways from the Herb Fitch soundbite we just heard, and let's review what he might mean about the 7 steps. Can you review that with us?
Well, he also said, but it does more than reveal the 7 steps that take us from man of earth to son of God. Those same 7 steps are 7 veils lifted up to reveal that the one who started out on the 7 steps was the Son of God at the beginning of the journey. This is the full circle that we travel, the separation, the journey, the return. But it's also the transformation that takes place. I like to understand this from the Transfiguration, where Jesus takes James, Peter, and John to the mountaintop where Moses and Elijah appear. You can also use the 7 churches in Revelations. You can use the 7 major chakras in Kriya Yoga, or you can use what we call the body of Christ and then work with the 7 personal planets. However you decide to represent this symbolically, there is a process where we separate from being individualized by the world mind under the government of karmic law, driven by the belief in 2 powers, and we graduate to spiritual sense, living out from understanding of the one perfect divine being, looking at itself, as itself, of itself, and to itself, under absolute harmony.
And so I really like what he said also. The revelation is there is no mortal man, there never was. Can you explain that to us?
To try and understand what we're calling life isn't life at all. And the only life is this self-existent spiritual life. And then we have to start to understand in this spiritual life, there are no needs. I shall not want, not even wanting. Why? Because divine life is perfect. It's whole, it's complete. Nothing ever gets added to it or taken away. And so rather than approaching our lives humanly, trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, asking, we now make our mind aware for the presence of the divine creation. And then we watch, wait, listen, and we let divine truth take over the scientific government of our sense of self. And in this knowledge of the divine principle, we then begin to experience this kingdom of heaven, perfect life, everywhere, always.
Herb says, the truth is that Jesus discovered something that no religion in the world is willing to teach, let alone to believe, and that is that you are divine now. End of his quote. So some people might think of that as saying, well, I am spiritual, but we're talking that being divine and being spiritual, we may have different connotations.
Well, I always think about what Socrates said, that the outer and the inner must be as one. It's all well and good to say, I am perfect, I am whole, I am complete. But then the benefit of having this form, having this mortal mind, it's like having the monitor on a computer. It gives us a screen we can use to prove what I am calling the divine creation is the divine creation. Am I revealing these spiritual fruits? Am I experiencing the peace, love, joy, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, patience, temperance of the divine principle? Or am I dealing with this mix of good and bad? Do I still struggle with fear of failure, of death? So we don't want to just be a contradiction. We want that element of purity, to think, feel, say, and do one and the same. If I say I am the expression of an indestructible principle, then I must experience all the benefits that come with this. And that's why we use the testimony of our senses as the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness, because consciousness is experience.
Swami, how do we move beyond the influence of Orthodox religion?
Well, it has to come to you from within. At some point, you may want to challenge your concept of God, of religion, because the Orthodox religious concept doesn't seem to be working. Challenging your concept of the divine principle is not being unfaithful to it. Like Herb Fitch tells us in Revelation, it removes the insult. As it stands now, we think God is this contradiction who rewards and punishes. This is not the nature of the divine principle. It's not the nature of God. God is absolute goodness. God is not a mix of life and death. God is eternal life. Once you build this mental landscape and move beyond the influence of this hypnotic state, which seems to be driven by the influence of Orthodox religion today, you become what we call sensitive enough to hear the call and strong enough to walk a solitary path. Because when you break away from this collective consensus, the belief this is how life is. In the beginning, man made God in his image and likeness, and we must accept that. You must be strong enough. And in order to be strong enough, you really want to get the benefit of internal support. What we talk about as far as a metaphysical or a mystical system, learning to use what you really do need to produce the feeling in your mind-body complex that you're okay, would be the equivalent of the Christian concept of born again of spirit, where you separate from your dependency on the outside world and you restructure the reward circuits of the brain of the physical form, and you internalize a new symbol that gives you the benefit of internal support. Then you are sensitive enough to hear the call, because in order for you to internalize spirit as your symbol for validation, you had to purify the mind-body complex. You had to create this hospitable environment to invite the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence into your awareness. With repetition comes absorption, and now you assimilate the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence as your symbol that produces your peak experience feeling. This plays out for you is every time you take a breath, it reinforces a feeling in your mind-body complex. You're happy, you're special, you're good enough. Why? Because you have tangible evidence. The universe is giving you this very precious resource, and with it is associated your peak experience feeling. It's a simple operation. Now you have a platform. You can start to move forward with these 7 steps where this man of earth or this person of earth becomes the divine child.
Swami, explain to us, Mary Baker Eddy describes what spirit is.
Spirit is a demonstrable principle, and it testifies with deeds, not words. It's not some abstract concept. We must have made the commitment to trust the invisible, intangible omnipresence and have a clear understanding of the omnipotence of the principle. We begin to rely initially on our belief, begin to use the principle by using the 5 corporeal senses as the testimony to assure we are receiving the spiritual fruits and not the mental, material, finite good. One with God is the majority, learning to stand alone. By testing the connection, we are sensitive enough to hear the call and strong enough to walk a solitary path, giving up the need for external reinforcement while receiving the wellspring of divine revelation isn't difficult when we have developed the faculty and mastered the mind-body complex. No longer settling for human satisfaction, but aspiring for spiritual truth, the perfection of being. That's a completely different aspiration than being a successful human.
So, Swami, what would it look like when we have these spiritual riches?
Living under the influence of spiritual awareness by denying anything unlike the divine self. How to do this without falling into pantheism or becoming a contradiction. Tell the truth about the lie and tell the truth about the truth across the board. As John told us, what God didn't make wasn't made. There is no good and evil world of energy. Being a faithful witness to the divine creation must create harmony and love in appearances. There's no iniquity in the divine mind. And so we now look at the testimony of our corporeal senses differently. We don't treat them as if this is the fact. This isn't the reality. We treat them more as if they are intruders or imposters. And we keep our minds stayed on what is invisible and intangible until we have this birth of Christ in consciousness. Once we have graduated from thinking with 5 corporeal senses and we're now knowing with 7 spiritual senses, we know the truth that makes us free from the belief in this good and evil world of energy. And from there, we rest. We rest in the knowledge under the protection of the divine law.
Swami, thank you for these insights. That's going to complete the show for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there to press to further your understandings. Swami, any final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and want for nothing. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.